If I could just announce something before we start, we'd like to give a thanks to Andy Ellis from the Yorkshire UFO group. He'll be showing NASA footage during the breaks and at lunchtime, and he's gone to a lot of trouble. Right. If I can now announce our first speakers, Jonathan Downes and Nigel Wright. Jonathan Downes is head of the Centre of the 14 Zoology, an environmental features editor for the Sunday newspaper, and Nigel Wright is the director of the UFO research. Both the journalists. They will be talking, over the last couple of years they've been investigating the numerous strange events alleged to have taken place in southern England. Interwoven with UFO sightings in South Devon in 1997 are cases of missing persons, missing time, earth flights, crop circles and animal mutilations. We will now discover the results of their investigations. So if you could please put your hands together and welcome on the stage Jonathan Downes and Nigel Wright.
I'm not going to stand up. I never stand up if I can possibly avoid it. Good morning, folks. Thanks for having us up here today. Now, I want to start by saying that anything which you read in this certain aspects, certain corners of the UFO press about Nigel's and my book is probably untrue. Because when the book first came out, a lot of people got completely the wrong idea about what we were actually trying to say. And they came out, Jon Downes and Nigel Wright have done their best to prove that UFOs don't exist. Have we, heck? That's not at all what we were trying to say. So before we go any further, let me say, yes, I think statistically it is probable that there are other civilizations somewhere else in the galaxy. Yes, quite possibly at some time or other they may have landed on this Earth and crash-landed places. Yes, I think it's certain that there's secret military technology from all sorts of governments which at any time is at least 15, probably more years ahead of anything you'll see at Farnborough Air Show. And no, none of those things have got anything to do with what we're talking about. So when people have read our book and got the wrong idea about it, in certain circles, especially in America, we've been painted as these horrible iconoclasts who are trying to destroy everything that ufologists hold dear. In fact, we're not trying to do anything of the sort. What we're trying to do is to come up with a rational explanation for one small grouping of UFO reports. Now, something which I'm sure that there's nobody in this audience who isn't aware of is that for many, many, many years there have been groups of apparently disparate, anomalous phenomena of all kinds happening to the same people in the same places at the same time. You have UFO reports, you have crop circles, you have sightings of strange animals, you have abductions, you have animal mutilations, you have ghosts, you have poltergeists, and all these things and more happen in the same places at the same times in sort of waves of apparently disparate paranormal activity. Quite a few people have come up with explanations for this quite well-known syndrome of activity, but most of them have involved taking enormous leaps of logic and going into what I'm afraid I consider to be the realms of pure science fiction. For the first time, I believe that Nigel and I have come up with an idea, a theory, which, if it isn't 100% correct, goes some of the way, at least, to explaining how and why this stuff happens. But I'm going ahead of myself. In order to explain how we got to where we got, Nigel and I will start at the beginning. Now, Nigel and I live in South Devon, which is a very quiet part of the country where people usually only ever go on holiday, and where mostly very little happens. Now, about 5 years ago, I did a TV show for West Country Television, as it was then. It was called Mysterious West, and I did 5 episodes of that as a consultant, and essentially it was just taking a new look at West Country mysteries. By trade, I'm a zoologist. At least back then, I was a fairly straightforward zoologist. But having done the Mysterious West show, I ended up having, I couldn't go into the pub without somebody coming up and saying, "Oh, I saw you on TV last week. We've had UFO sightings in our back garden. My great aunt's a witch. The next door neighbour's got a ghost in his house," or whatever. And more by luck than by judgment, a fairly dull and fairly straightforward zoologist ended up becoming somebody who, whenever any of the local newspapers wanted to comment on something paranormal, or whenever a TV company wanted to know something about West Country mysteries, always came to me. And more by luck than by judgment, I became the sort of mouthpiece for paranormal activity in South Devon. Now, I had a radio show for a while. It was called Weird About the West. And one day we were doing a show on the UFO sightings in the Exmouth area, and we had a phone call, and it was him. And he phoned up and said, "Here, John, do you mind if I come over and visit, because I've got some data for you?" And I thought, oh, God, not another fruitcake. We have these all the time. But then he turned up, and it turned out that he was a really nice bloke, and from turning up one afternoon, he ended up sort of staying for about 6 months. And we found ourselves working together ever since. And at the beginning of the summer of 1997, Nigel, my business partner Graham, and I found ourselves in the middle of what I believe is the biggest wave of UFO activity that has happened in the UK in recent years. Right?
Yeah. Over the... Oh, I've got to stand up, I suppose. A bit further away. Hi. Well, over the period of the summer of 1997, what started out as one or two UFO sightings rapidly became a deluge. I think, was it correct in saying over 100 reported witnesses of 90-odd sightings? And
98 incidents and 137
witnesses in a matter of about 2 or 3 months.
7.5 weeks.
And it...
It's ridiculous.
Well, John's often sort of said that we were somewhat akin to Battle of Britain fighter pilots coming in, because we were sort of up at all hours, sat at chairs next to the telephone. My wife and I were actually answering the phone at 3 and 4 in the morning, with excited witnesses on the other end saying, "I've seen one of these things, what is it?" And it really did become quite unusual. I think pro rata probably busier than Bonnybridge over the same sort of space of time. But as John will go on to explain in a moment, it wasn't just UFOs that were cropping up in this particular area at that moment. What made it so interesting was, apart from a UFO wave, we also were coming across all sorts of weird and strange phenomena occurring within a radius of, 10 miles or so of Exmouth.
Now, I don't know how many of you people actually know the South Devon geography, but if you can imagine that you've got the Ex estuary, River Ex, going up towards Exeter, and on the east side of the River Ex, you've got an area of wild country called Woodbury Common. And in a triangle with Exmouth at one end, the bottom end of the triangle, the village of Woodbury at the top of the triangle, and Otter Cove at the other end of the triangle, a very, very small area, no more than about 10 square miles, there was an enormous amount of paranormal activity. Now, I've always been one to believe that somehow UFO reports are linked with other strange occurrences. But the events of that summer, for me anyway, confirmed it. Because as we began to look into it, we found a wide range of strange, quite disturbing occurrences. I think the first thing that happened was on the 18th of August 1997, when I had a phone call from a lady who lived in Higher Hallam Road in the north of Exmouth, who said that her cat had been attacked by some strange animal. Now, as I said earlier, I'm a zoologist, and a lot of what I do is involved with reports of people who, reports by people who believe that they've encountered the big cats which are roaming wild on the moorlands down in the West Country, things like the beast of Exmoor and the beast of Bodmin. And a lot of my work is involved with that. And also, to a certain extent, people do come to me as a zoologist when their animals have been injured, because if I give an affidavit then on the cause of the injury, it means that they can claim off the pet health insurance. So this woman phoned me up and wanted me to come and have a look at her cat. Her story was that she had been standing out on her balcony the night before, 2 nights before, I think, and she'd seen this enormous ball of glowing white and yellow light floating above the house. And as she was watching it, she saw her cat climbing out of the cat flap in the back kitchen door and going off in the light of this thing out into the bushes at the side of her garden. Then she heard what she described as a god-awful noise, and the cat came rushing back in, covered in blood, and ran back into the kitchen. She ran downstairs to see what was wrong with the cat, and by the time she looked out the window again, the light had gone. Now, 2 days after, I actually came to look at this cat. And this is where it gets very strange, because you would imagine anything that had caused a fresh wound on an animal would still be fairly raw and still fairly open and bloody 2 days later, because she hadn't taken it to a vet, it had not been stitched up. When I got there was a ridge of scar tissue on the cat going from just under its ear down to the top of its breastbone, right along its neck, as if it had been clawed by something, but clawed with a strange single claw. And there was quite a thick ridge of scar tissue. But from a medical point of view, or from a veterinary point of view, you would have thought that scar tissue was from a wound that was at least 3 months old. Because the idea of it being able to heal up like that overnight, or over 2 nights, is highly peculiar. Interestingly enough, when I was in Mexico a year or so later, I was talking to people who'd had animals that had been involved in chupacabra attacks. And some of the witnesses told me that they had animals who had actually survived attacks when they'd had a flock of sheep or a flock of goats attacked. And 1 or 2 animals had been slightly injured but not killed, that the wounds had healed up equally as quickly, which was something I had never heard of before, which was particularly strange. But when we started to talk to this woman at Higher Hallam Road, it turned out that the stories didn't end there, because she had 3 or 4 student teachers living with her as lodgers, and that they had seen a string of strange animals in the woods surrounding her house. Now, she had a little, what had once been little riding stables, and most of the stables had been sort of converted into flatlets, but there was still stabling for 3 horses there. And she had various student teachers who were training at the local teacher training college, living with her most of the time. And 2 of them had been walking back from Exmouth back home only a few days before the incident with the cat. And they saw what they could describe as the most peculiar animal they'd ever seen, crossing the driveway in front of them as they were walking up towards their landlady's house. They described, and they drew this for me afterwards, a strange creature that looked like a cross between a lynx and a dachshund. Now, as you know, a lynx is a fairly heavy-set European and North American cat with tufty ears and a sort of ruff like a mini mane around it, and a very short bobtail. That's why one of the species of North American lynx is known as the bobcat. And a dachshund, as we also know, is a long, thin dog that looks a bit like a sausage. And this description that they gave was of an animal which was completely and utterly zoologically impossible, because not only can you not have a cross between a cat and a dog, it just don't happen, but this particular combination of zoological elements which she described was unlike anything else which has ever been known. But then the weirdness didn't stop then, because on August Bank holiday, 2 kids were out swimming at Otter Cove.
Well, this came to my attention because by now I was writing a weekly column for the local newspaper on the paranormal events that were going on.
Cool.
John's having his breakfast. And
And you thought I was joking.
Yes.
You did.
Oh, good grief. Right. As you can imagine, when you're writing for a local newspaper, you do get some very weird and wonderful letters. Cheers, John.
Of course I did.
No, thank you. Bit early for me. And one of these letters, thank you. One of these letters concerned a local lady whose sons often go swimming in Otter Cove. Now, Otter Cove is a little rocky inlet which is directly beneath the local holiday camp. I don't know if anybody's been to Exmouth, but it's a Haven holiday camp, so it's quite a big one. And you have to actually go through the camp to get down to Otter Cove to bathe there, and it's just rocks, there's no beach, it's just a rocky inlet. So these 2 lads had been out swimming, and it was getting near dusk, and she said that as they got back on the rocks to get changed to go home, all of a sudden, one of them turned around to look at the sea for whatever reason and was amazed to find this light coming up from beneath the surface. And to begin with, he thought it was a diver because, if you see a light coming up from underneath, it's a natural assumption. And this light turned from a greenish colour, which is obviously the water, and then it shot up out of the water and literally blinded them, both of them. To which point, being young teenage lads, they ran terrified and climbed up this very steep ladder, which is sort of cast iron and rusting and about 25 feet high to get up onto the steep pathway up above. And what makes this so interesting is that's the USO report, that's fair enough. At the same time, Mother is driving onto the holiday camp to pick the boys up. As she drives through the archway that leads into the camp itself, there's a patch of open grass. There's a hedgerow, then a patch of open grass, the road, and another hedgerow. And as I say, it was just getting dusk. She described that there was a very strange-looking, very weird, totally unrecognizable type of lit-up animal. That's how she described it, a lit-up animal. And it literally shot out in front of her car, and she had to brake very hard to avoid hitting it. So she, as most of us would, or green drivers, sat there in a bit of shock for a couple of seconds, thinking she'd hit this thing. Then she noticed it sort of scurry off into the bushes to the left, and it was fine. What she thought was so weird was it was just lit up. I imagine her surprise when she went down to pick the boys up to find both of them shaking in fear as well, and the fact that they just encountered a USO. So we've got these two strange things happening within less than a quarter of a mile of each other, and on the same evening, virtually minute by minute. Sure.
Now, the thing is that this is all within only a couple of weeks of the incident involving the cat and the strange animal that looked like a cross between a dachshund and a lynx. Now, these two incidents only happened about 6 miles from each other. So within 6 miles of each other, in a highly populated area of South Devon, we've now got two very strange animals. Because the creature which Nigel's witness described as being all lit up, which can only describe some form of bioluminescence, some sort of animal which glows of its own volition, is also completely impossible. There are no such things as bioluminescent tetrapods. Tetrapods, by the way, are any vertebrate animal that has 4 legs. And although there are bioluminescent fish and there are bioluminescent invertebrates, there are no known species of bioluminescent tetrapod. The only two possible exceptions to that is a type of frog from West Africa, which may have a small glowing dot on its nose to attract insects, and a type of small lizard from Trinidad. But both of those have never been described properly by scientists.
I'm sorry about that. I just forgot to mention that as for some of you may wonder if it was a diver, I contacted a friend of mine who is in a local sub-aqua club, and I said, just out of curiosity, any of you lads go diving or spearfishing around Otter Cove? To which point he rolled around in hysterics on the floor at laughter, literally at me. He said, you've got to be joking, you've got a 6-knot cross current there, treacherous sharp rocks on the seabed, and in the pitch dark, there's no way this thing is virtually around a headland. So it could not possibly have been a diver. He would have had to be literally suicidal to be out there at dusk. So that's the thing, that the USO was definitely not a diver's life of any description.
So you've got two totally impossible animals. You've got a strange animal like a large cat, which glows of its own volition, glows in the dark, and you've got a strange creature looking like cross between a dachshund and a lynx. But the story doesn't end there, because the very next day, after the kids had seen the strange light coming out of the sea at Otter Cove, guess what was washed up on the beach? It was first seen on the sea off Otter Cove, and then the currents took it over and was washed up on the next beach. A dead 20-foot long pilot whale. Now this is where it gets very, very strange. Because again, with my zoologist hat on, I'd always told Nigel I was always interested in whale strandings. Something that's always fascinated me. And when he phoned up, we didn't know there was anything strange about it at all. He phoned up to tell me that there'd been this whale washed up on the beach. And I said, well, great, can you go and get some pictures of it for me? I didn't realise quite what a difficult job that was.
Yes, thanks, John. Yeah, I really appreciated that. So John was on the phone. He said, I said, look, this pilot whale's been washed ashore at Otter Cove. I said, this is really getting too much, because we don't have whales washed ashore on our beaches very often. We've come to how long beforehand in a moment. So, not really knowing what the job involved, I toddled off with my camera down to the beach to have a look at this whale. Now, I don't know if any of you have been near a dead 20-foot sperm whale, pilot whale rather. It's let's put it this way: you've got to stand upwind a bit or downwind, whichever. It sort of attacks the nasal senses. But anyway, I started taking some photographs of this poor creature, and the thing looked perfectly intact. Not a mark on the whale until you walked around one side of it. And as a keen ufologist, when I walked around and I saw the belly of the whale, I literally froze, because what I saw was an identical cattle mutilation injury, i.e. the genital area of the whale had been cored out. There's no other way of describing it. An incision about the size of a dinner plate had taken away the genital and rectal area of the whale. Perfectly smooth incision, no, not ragged or cut in any way. It was just smooth-sided incision. No other marks on the whale. So I waited for the English Heritage chap to turn up. They're responsible for disposing of the carcasses. And donning my journalistic hat, I went over to interview him, and I said, can you explain the injury? Can you say how this whale came to die? It was a very young whale, it wasn't very old. He said, no, I can't. I said, well, it's got that rather gruesome injury. He said, yes, that baffles me. I said, why? He said, well, that's not due to a boat strike or propeller strike, and it's not due to a natural predator. And in fact, he said, I can't really account for that injury at all. And at that point, I thought I'd better not tell him what I thought my thinking on it was. But as John will explain in a moment, because this has got more a zoological angle, that wasn't the first instance of a mutilated whale to occur at Otter Cove. John?
Now, what gets stranger is that there is no known animal in the sea which can cause an injury like that. There is a fish called the cookie-cutter shark, which, as the name implies, does make the circular incisions in its victims, but the incisions are about the size of the top of this canistella. See, whoever paid for it, there was a reason to have the canistella as a prop. But this fish is about between 5 and 8 feet long, and it leaves circular incisions the size of the top of the canistella. This thing left a circular incision the size of a large dinner plate. So by that argument, you're talking about a fish which would have been something between 25 and 28 feet long. And the idea of having a 25 or 28 foot long version of the cookie-cutter shark, which, by the way, the fish only found in the Sea of Japan anyway, off the coast of South Devon, gives us a third mysterious animal. So we have a cat which glows in the dark, a cross between a dachshund and a lynx, and a 30-foot-long version of a Japanese fish, all in the same place at the same time. Now, I don't know about you guys, but as a zoologist, that don't make sense to me. Anyway, a couple of days later, Nigel phoned up in high excitement and said, John, we've got another mutilated whale from exactly the same place. And it turned out that to practically the day, 10 years before, another whale had washed up in the same place. Now, to show you how rare this is, over a period of 25 years, there have only been 3 whales washed up on that whole stretch of coastline. The 2 that we're talking about today, and a baby dolphin which would be hit by a boat. I don't know what it is about the currents and about the coast, or whether it is just that you don't get whales in Lyme Bay, but there has never been any other, there have been no other whales washed up since the mid-70s there. But 10 years before our one, that happened at the beginning of September 1997, at the beginning of September 1987, there was another whale washed up at exactly the same place. Now this is where it gets interesting, because the whale that was washed up in 1987 was a Cuvier's beaked whale. The whale that was washed up in 1997 is a pilot whale. Pilot whales are common, and they are not particularly important zoologically, but Cuvier's beaked whale is a member of a very, very obscure family of whales. And quite a lot of the members of the beaked whale family are so ill-known that they're only known from 2 or 3 skulls washed up on a beach, and many species have never actually been seen alive. And so whenever any beaked whale, especially Cuvier's beaked whale, washes up on British coast, all the people from the Natural History Museum and the Union for Conservation of Nature and English Heritage and the Whale and Dolphin Preservation Trust and everybody else you can think of are all desperate to examine the creature because people know so little about them. But the one thing we do know is it was a young female. Now this is where it gets interesting, because according to the newspaper reports at the time, it too had strange injuries. Now, as I'm sure you guys all know, within cattle mutilations, apart from the cord rectum and sexual organs, another syndrome is to have the ears cut off or the udders cut off. But whales don't either have external ears or external udders, so I think we can forget about that. And another one is to have half the jaw removed. Well, guys, if I tell you that the whale has no external ears, no external udders, and that the rectum and sexual organs weren't a cord at all, can anybody guess, and I will give a prize for a cigarette afterwards, so anybody can guess what the injury was on this particular whale? Yes, you're right. Half the jaw was removed. Now this is where a little piece of zoological knowledge and some detective work goes a long way. Because, according to the local newspapers and the police reports at the time, somebody had gone down to the dead whale and callously, quote, cut off the lower jaw with a chainsaw, unquote, in order to remove the teeth as souvenirs. Now, Nigel's just told you how rickety the path down to Otter Cove is. First of all, and also that it's got a holiday camp, a busy holiday camp on the cliff right above it. Anybody know the noise that a diesel-powered chainsaw makes? Also, can you imagine what sort of complete bizarre lunatic would have to abseil down the cliff in the middle of the night, not making any sound, without any lights, in order to cut the jaw off a whale with a chainsaw without actually attracting attention? Yeah, right.
We should add that it's directly underneath the Ministry of Defence firing range as well. So
there's absolutely no
it
way.
would attract some attention, I think, with a chainsaw directly beneath the firing range, yeah.
Anyway, we have the final piece of conclusive proof that it couldn't have been anything of the sort. Because the police and English Heritage and all these people came out with these wonderful ideas. Some loony, probably a bit like me, had decided to saw off the jaw so they could take the teeth as a souvenir. Female Cuvier's beaked whales do not have teeth. So the idea that anybody had cut the jaw off to take the teeth is just completely ridiculous. Now, Nigel and I got wildly excited about this and decided to try and correlate, because we've got such an enormous file on the 1997 sightings of UFO sightings and strange animals, and I'm only giving you a fraction of it. You want to know more, buy the book. It's available from the charming young lady out in the foyer. But we've got enormous files on UFO reports, abduction reports, animal mutilations, animal attacks, disappearing animals. All these things happened from 1997. So we decided to go back to 1987 and see if we could find anything else that had happened at the same time as the earlier whale had been washed up. And lo and behold, we found strange animals, UFOs, abductions, and unsolved murder, all sorts of really weird things happened. Then we went back to 1977. Now, Nigel had been actually at college in 1977, and it turned out that, yes, once again, at the end of the 1970s, in 1977 and 1978, there'd also been a UFO wave in exactly the same place.
I can remember that because as a student we used to go up to Woodbury Common. There's a particular high point at Woodbury Common called the Castle, which is actually a preserved Iron Age fort. It's one of the best ones in Britain. And it has a car park which overlooks the Excess Street and onto Dartmoor in the distance. I used to go up there with a few drinks at night and the girlfriends and literally watch these orange lights, balls of light, float in from the sea, virtually eye level to us, and go up the Excess Street and disappear into the distance. And it was like a free fireworks display. So, oh, there goes another one, there goes another one. It got so commonplace in the end that you were talking about it as if you'd seen a bird or, I've just seen a deer, which is quite common there as well. Oh, there goes another UFO. Oh, yeah, so it is. So that was happening, as John says, in 1977, and that I can vouch for because it's my final year at college.
And we went back through the records, and we found right back at the beginning of the century, every 9 or 10 years, the same scenario happened. You'd have an outbreak of UFO activity, you'd have outbreaks of other strange things happening, animal deaths, strange animals appearing, people disappearing under strange circumstances, unsolved murders. Once every 9 or 10 years, the whole area, with 3 epicenters of the Otter Cove, of Littleton, which is a little suburb of Exmouth, and of Woodbury Castle, the whole place went mental about every 9 or 10 years. And we traced it back as far as 1909 and then gave up. Then essentially, I went off to Mexico to make a film for Channel 4, and Nigel went back to looking after his wife and kids. And when I came back from Mexico, I was skint, as I always am when I come back from anywhere overseas. And I managed to persuade my publisher that what we really needed to do was to give me and Nigel some money to write a UFO book. And we had no real idea what we were going to write it about. We knew that we'd got all this data, but we had no idea how we were going to present it. So Nigel and I started going through all this enormous amount of data to try and make sense of it all. Now, while I was in Central America, I was in Central Mexico and I was in Puerto Rico, I found that to a certain extent at least all the same things had been happening there. You had the same hotspots of activity which could not be seen in isolation. It's totally facile to see it just purely in terms of UFO reports or strange animal reports. For example, in Puerto Rico you had abductions, you had UFO reports, you had sightings even before the Chupacabra, again on a cycle of between 8, 9, 10 years. You had reports of strange animals turning up and doing very strange things. 10 years before the Chupacabra sightings, you had accounts of an animal called the devil bird, which people described as being like one of the black turkey vultures, that somebody had grafted a metal cockfighting spear onto its beak. And 10 years before that, you had accounts of something called the vampire of Mocha. And so, again, on a sort of cyclical period, you had outbursts of really strange stuff happening. Several years ago, I wrote a book, which is, and again, I don't say about in the foyer, a book called The Owl Man and Others, which is about a series of strange occurrences that happened in southern Cornwall during the summer of 1976, when again you had sightings of strange creatures, you had unexplained disappearances, people and animals doing very weird things, unexplained deaths, both of people and animals, and a lot of UFO activity. And again, it had happened on a cyclical level. And so as Nigel and I started to go through the enormous amount of data we'd collected, we began to realize that what we'd originally thought was just a purely West Country, a purely South Devon phenomenon, was actually nothing of the sort. That everywhere that we had investigated in depth, and now I'm only going to talk about the places I have investigated, but I would bet you if you go to Rendlesham or Bonnybridge or any of the other places where you get big spates of weird shit activity, you'll find the same scenario taking place. But in the places we've investigated, which are Littleham, a suburb of Exmouth, Woodbury Common, Mornan Church in southern Cornwall, the Central Mexican Plain, Puerto Rico, and the Otokovo area of Lime Bay, that's 7 places, you have the same scenario happening. You have apparently disparate groups of paranormal activity happening to the same people in the same places at the same time on a cyclical basis. So once we'd actually agreed that there was a phenomenon to investigate, we had to try and work out why, how, where, and what. And this is where it got really difficult. Now, I'm not going to go through, because we're short of time today, I'm not going to go through all 7 places, but I will go through 4 for you. I'll go through 4, 2 in England and 2 elsewhere. We discovered, finally, we put all the data we could get into the computer. We tried to find out the geology, the weather, the history, the climate, the chemical composition of the water, the cultural significance, everything of all these places. And we couldn't find a single correlating thing, a single point of correlation apart from the fact that weird stuff was happening there. Until finally, and I cannot remember who it was, but it was me, was it? Yeah. It was me, Nigel, and 2 colleagues of ours, Richard Freeman and Graham Inglis, the 4 of us, surrounded by bits of paper. We were sitting in my sitting room one night, and I don't know who it was who came up with it. Nigel says it was me, I think it was Richard. But whoever it was, somebody came up with it, and we realized that there was one thing that all these places had in common. They were all places which now are very much in decline and are not anywhere near as important as they were in previous historical times. Now, I'll just go through this very, very quickly for you guys, just to show you what I mean. First of all, Puerto Rico. Until 1898, Puerto Rico was the headquarters of the capital of the Spanish Empire in the Western Hemisphere. It was the place where the cardinal, the Pope's right-hand man of the New World, had his palace. It's where the viceroy, the Emperor of Spain, had his palace. It was a center of social, cultural, and political activity. Then, after the Spanish-American War of 1798, it became an American colony. No, we're not allowed to call them colonies anymore, an American independent territory. Now, and fair enough, you know, but it is a very strange place, because, I mean, I spent quite a time out there, and unlike, it is both socially and politically and geographically halfway in between any of its neighbours. It hasn't got self-determination and independence like the Dominican Republic or Cuba or Haiti or any of its geographical neighbours, and it hasn't got full statehood within the United States like the rest of the United States of America. It is somewhere betwixt in between, and there is a quite high level of socio-political unrest there. Look at the central Mexican plain, a wonderful place. I've always enjoyed being there. But whereas in historical times, in the times of the Aztecs, it was the center of one of the greatest empires the world has ever known. Even in the times of early this century under the Emperor Maximilian, it was part of an enormous empire which included large amounts of what is now the United States. Now it is very, very, very much on the decline. And although I had a wonderful time there, and I would go back there again tomorrow, and I've always enjoyed going there, it is a place who, at least the parts I went, the economy seems to exist roughly on three things: very low-level tourism, selling cheap drugs, and child prostitution. And it's very much down on its luck. It is far less important socially, politically, economically, and spiritually than it was even 100 years ago, let alone 500 years ago. And you can see the same scenario happening in the places that we've investigated in the United Kingdom. And again, because of time, I'll only give 2 of the 4 or 5 places that we've been to in the United Kingdom. But in our book, and in my other book, The Owl Man and Others, I show in far greater depth how this scenario has worked, at least in all the places I've investigated, and I would hazard a guess in places which are well known as UFO and paranormal hotspots elsewhere in the country. For example, Woodbury Castle was the first place to be inhabited on the east side of the River Exe. It's the earliest Iron Age hill fort in the area, and for centuries and centuries and centuries, well over 2,000 years, it was the center of social, economic, and military power in the area. Even as recently as the Napoleonic Wars, there was a full-time military garrison there. Now there ain't. Nobody lives there at all now.
I should say that there's, on the actual common itself, it's rather unusual because it's not very big, but it has about 47 Neolithic burial mounds. And the unusual thing was a couple of these were excavated on an amateur basis in the 1920s. And when they actually excavated the floor of the burial chamber, they found what was described as very unusual patterning of the stone. The stone was laid out in spiral forms and in weird cross-patterning, unlike any other example that's been found in mainland England. So there we got another strange occurrence happening again on Woodbury Common. And Woodbury, by the way, actually gets its name from the Old English Wodenbury, because apparently it was such a fearful place, and in those times they thought the god Woden lived there. And that's how it actually got derived its original name.
It was always a place of power, and it has been suggested that the strange stone designs that Nigel's described were actually there because Woodbury Castle was so important, and so much more important than any of the other places on that side of the river. But then again, nobody lives there at all now. And Littleham, which is now a tiny, fairly, I know Nigel lives there, but I mean it's fairly insignificant, I'm not dissing the place, but it is an insignificant, unimportant and fairly dull suburb of Exmouth. I mean, you live there, it's true, isn't it?
True.
However, it was not always the case. Now, Littleham, once upon a time, was the most important place in that area. The grant to the manor of Littleham was given by Edward the Confessor in 40-something. I've got the dates outside. And there was a manor at Littleham for many, many years before there was ever more than the three fishermen's cottages at Exmouth. In 1067, when the Vikings invaded Exeter, they laid siege to the manor of Littleham but couldn't get in. They burnt half of Exeter, but they just totally ignored Exeter. There was nothing there. There was a dung heap and three fishermen's cottages.
Well, because
it meant nothing.
Exmouth has actually built up since the Regency period. It became very famous. Oh, I've got to stand up a minute. Excuse me. My back's hurting. It became very famous because a certain Lady Nelson, of Lord Nelson's wife, came to live in Exmouth while his lordship, shall we say, was enjoying himself with other female company. And she actually bought a house on the beacon there, and she's actually buried in Littleham churchyard. And because of the patronage of the said Lady Nelson, more of the peers of the realm bought houses down there, and so it became a very fashionable Regency place. Having said that, it was only the sea front that was fashionable. Behind it, we found a record, didn't we, of an account given by the one of the representatives of the local church, who was sent down to try and put Exmouth to rights. And it said that it was a place of, what was it? Lurid behaviour and beyond all hope of redemption.
Well, it hasn't changed much.
Hasn't changed much now, and it's still out on a Saturday night.
But essentially, Exmouth is only a very, very recent place, because Littleham was the important... Littleham had a church. There was a church in Littleham 300 years before there was a church in Exmouth. Even as recently as the mid-19th century, there was a vicar in Littleham, but only a curate in Exmouth who was paid for by the vicar. And even now, the church in Littleham is known as the parish of Littleham cum Exmouth. And so until very, very recently, Littleham was the historic, economic, social, spiritual centre for activity in the area. And it's purely only because Lord Nelson wanted to get rid of his wife that Exmouth actually matters at all, because if it hadn't been for that, Littleham would still be the most important town in that part of the country. And I could go on, but I mean, we're running out of time. So you have got all... The only thing that we got to be able to link all these places where there had been such a wide range of paranormal phenomena happening was that they'd all been far more important once than they are now. But then again, we came to that wonderful discovery, and then we thought, well, yeah, so what? What are we going to do with it? And then we had the other great breakthrough. And this time, Nigel wasn't there. I was half asleep, and it was my mate Richard who came up with this one. And this is the third part of the puzzle. Now, have any of you guys out there ever heard of tulpas? You know what a tulpa is, a thought form? Okay, going through it quickly. Most major religions believe that it is possible through the power of prayer, or magic, or ritual, or meditation. And essentially, guys, all four of those things are basically the same. It is possible to create a quasi-independent entity, which is independent from the people who've created it, which is used for various religious purposes. The Tibetans used to create them in order to guard the temples and guard the temple rules and things. And the most famous example of this in modern literature is from a lady called Dame Alexandra David Neal, who was a French explorer who crossed Central Asia in the early part of this century, and was actually the first European woman ever to become a Tibetan Lama. Now, when I was in America a couple of months ago, I said this, and some appalling middle-aged American woman stood up and said, but gee, John, I know this woman who went to a workshop last week in San Antonio, and she became a Lama. Well, there's a hell of a difference between some overpaid American lady paying out $500 and getting a certificate from some geezer who's probably never been to Tibet, and this wonderful, incredibly brave French explorer who spent most of her life crossing the central Tibetan plain under the most god-awful conditions, lived with the Tibetans and lived with the Lamas for 10, 20, 30 years, and finally was accepted by them as one of their own. And when she came back to Paris, she wrote this extraordinary book called With Magicians and Mystics in Tibet, in which she describes, amongst other things, she describes the meditative magical process by which she herself actually created a tulpa, a thought form, and how she visualized and meditated for a period of several weeks on the image of what she called a fat, jolly little monk. And she actually managed to create something which other people could see. However, this is where it gets weird. When she stopped trying to feed it with her emotion, with her energy each day, it suddenly started to escape from her power and became, to use her words, sly and malicious. Things started disappearing around the camp. Things started getting broken. And eventually, this creature, this entity, managed to escape her control altogether and become totally independent. Now, within the canon of parapsychological literature, there are dozens of examples of this. And again, because we're short of time today, by the way, are we doing the time, Nigel? Because we are short of time today, and I've got about 14 minutes to be able to wrap this up before you've got to give us questions, I won't go through lots of different examples, but Dion Fortune, for example, the great British occultist, wrote how she created a thought form reminiscent of the Norse wolf god Fenris. The Toronto Parapsychological Society invented a totally artificial thought form ghost of a cavalier called Philip, who never actually existed at all. They invented this wonderful scenario and sounded like something out of the Mills and Boone novel, and they all meditated and worked and practiced on this thing until this entity actually began to take on a life of its own. There are dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of different examples of thought forms. These are all things which are found in every major religion and most of the minor ones, and which can be read up in any decent book on parapsychology. Now, if you got a thought form, and I know you guys are probably thinking, well, what the bloody hell a thought form's got to do with UFOs and Xmas or strange animals in Puerto Rico?
That's what I thought.
I know you did. I just had to keep on telling you to shut up. Nige, trust me, dear boy, trust me. But essentially, I'm sure you guys are wondering what the hell I'm talking about. But if we take it as read that every major religion, and most of the minor ones, and many parapsychologists believe that the quasi-independent thought forms can exist. As a scientist, I want to know, okay, if they exist, what are they made of? Now, everything up to now that I have said is pure and utter fact. It is verifiable. We have got the documentation to prove it. What I'm just about to say is the last bit of fact. After that, it is pure supposition. The last bit of fact is that ever since the modern age of science started about 200 years ago, successive generations of scientists have tried to find ways of codifying and measuring everything. You have measurements of heat, you have measurements of mass, you have measurements of light, you have measurements of temperature, you have measurements of growth, you have measurements of speed. These are all well known. But over and over and over again, since the beginning of the last century, the 19th century, people have tried to work out a way of measuring life, measuring the life force, the thing that makes you and me and all you guys here and Nige, makes us alive, and this lectern and the empty cans of beer here not alive. What is it that makes us alive? And various scientists over the years have tried to come up with a measurable life force. I think the first person to try it was a guy called Anton Mesmer, who's best known because of the term mesmerism. He hypothesized what he called animal magnetism. He believed that you could cure all human illnesses by use of strong magnets, because he believed that around the human body was what they called an animal magnetic force. He believed that the life force was something akin to electromagnetism, and that the life force, a measurable life force, was what he called animal magnetism. 20 or 30 years after that, a German philosopher and scientist called Baron Karl von Reichenbach worked on the same subject, and he hypothesized what he called odyllic life force energy. Again, an electromagnetic, measurable life force. And most recently, a geezer called Wilhelm Wright. And I don't know if there's any old hippies out here in the audience, but the first time I ever heard of Wilhelm Wright was to an obscure song by Hawkwind, which went, I got my organ accumulator, and I know it's gonna make me feel greater, and so on and so on and so on. And I had no idea what the hell they were singing about, but I'd always liked the record. And when I finally got hold of Wilhelm Reich's books about orgone energy, what he called orgone energy, again, a measurable life force, it all began to make sense. Those are only 3 of dozens of people who have actually tried to measure this life force energy. Nobody
quite
yet
a
has...
fast man, actually,
Yeah.
William Wright, isn't
Fascinating,
He's
but
got
very sad.
one of the very rare distinction of actually having his books burnt twice in his lifetime, once by the Germans and then by the Americans. He actually ended his life in an American prison in the hospital wing, having been persecuted in Nazi Germany for his beliefs as well.
Now, the strange thing is that all these people have tried to describe a measurable life force, but none of them have yet managed to do so. Now, everything up to now I have said, and that Nigel has said, has been true, has been fact. Now, I'm going to ask you to make a leap of faith, because from now on, this is pure supposition. What if the people who meditate, pray, do magical rituals, or whatever, to produce a tulpa, a thought form, what if they are making this thought form out of their own collective life force energy? I mean, it has to be made out of something, and I tell you what, guys, I, for one, have never been able to think of anything better. Now, because we're going to have to wrap this up slightly, can you imagine what happens if you are prepared to accept, and now this is all a leap of faith, it's all a hypothesis, prepared to accept that idyllic life force energy is what tulpas, thought forms are made of, and it comes from prayer, from meditation, from magical ritual. What happens if people are praying or doing magic or meditating, but they are not trying to invent, trying to create a specific thought form? They're not trying to make something in their own image. They are just praying and reaching out this idyllic life force energy. If it hasn't got a form to be made into it, remains formless. It would have to. So can you imagine, guys, over any place where there has been any great center of religious or spiritual or socio-spiritual activity, can you imagine a large amorphous blob of idyllic life force energy? Now here, I hate being anthropomorphic, but imagine something a bit like a jellyfish, something you can't see, but over every place where there has been a center of religious or spiritual activity, you've got a blob, a mass of this idyllic life force energy. Now, as Alexander David Neal has proved, and other people like Nicholas Roerach have hypothesized, these tulpas, these life forms which are made of idyllic life force energy, they feed off human emotion. They feed off something produced by human beings when they are in extremis. Whether we're talking about something that is electromagnetic in nature, or something with pheromones in nature, or something to do with body heat, or something to do with electromagnetism, I have no idea, but it's something to do with that. And somehow it is an excess of human emotion, usually caused during religious ecstasy, which actually feeds. And I hate using words like feeds, because again, we're being anthropomorphic, and I ain't talking about a new life form. I'm talking about something which is a quasi-life form. I'm talking about something for which you really need a whole new vocabulary to describe. But imagine that whatever they are, they have to be fed by human emotion. Now, guys, apart from the spiritual ecstasies from people doing magic, ritual, prayer, meditation, what are the two things which come out with the biggest outpouring of human emotion? Sex and fear. Now, how many times have you read within the canon of paranormal literature of Bigfoot reports and UFO reports and other paranormal occurrences happening in lovers' lanes where they're courting couples? Within the Bigfoot canon of Bigfoot research, there's thousands of those. But even more so, how many times when you have been interviewing a UFO witness, or when you've been reading about an interview with a UFO witness, how many times have you heard that their consciousness has changed, that they have been inexplicably either enormously excited and emotionally almost described as a religious experience, or frightened crapless? whatever happens, people who encounter paranormal occurrences, be they be Bigfoot, be they be UFOs, be they be lake monsters, whatever, they have an enormous emotional output. Now, unfortunately, we're running very much out of time, but my theory, which Nigel I've dragged kicking and screaming, much against his better judgment, into, is that although many of these occurrences are real to the people who encountered them, I am not gainsaying anybody's deeply held beliefs or anybody's personal experiences. They are very, very real, but they are not real in a physical, three-dimensional way, in the way this kind of beer is or these bricks are here. They are real because they are the result of an encounter between the witness and an amorphous body of this idyllic life force energy which has been created and which feeds and which propagates itself through human emotion. This is why you have the same things happening to the same people in the same places on a cyclical level. Now, one last thing before we take some questions. For years, people have been saying that there's been a rise in paranormal and UFO activity at the same time as people are not going to church anymore. Well, of course the bloody has been. If you want to believe the people of Fortean Times, it is because people want to believe in something. That's horseshit. If you want to believe people in the fundamentalist Christian brigade, it is because if you don't pray hard enough, the demons are going to get you. Well, that's actually a little bit closer to it, but they've still got it completely bloody wrong. It is because as people are not going to church anymore, and you must remember that most Christian churches are built on what were the sites of pre-Christian religious activity, and although I'm a Roman Catholic myself, a lot of my friends are pagans, and I managed to really annoy both my Christian friends and my pagan friends by saying this, but all religions are basically the same. And you have a situation, if you have a situation which for anything up to 3,000 years, like on Woodbury Common, people worshipped, people prayed, people lived their lives there, lived out their lives, lived out all their spiritual devotions, first of all from the ancient Celtic religions, then with early Christianity, then with later Christianity, over a period of maybe 2,000-3,000 years. And then suddenly they're not there anymore, but the idyllic life force energy is. Is there any reason to think it's even the slightest bit strange that when you've got idyllic life force energy there, it reacts instinctively with the few people it does come across on a cyclical basis in order to produce something within their heads which may have an objective reality that again may not, in order to produce a deep emotional response, because it is that emotional response from which it feeds. Yes. And the final thing being that if people ask, why do these things happen every 10 years, or every 8 years, or every 9 years, at the risk of sounding horribly anthropomorphic, maybe that's only when the thing, whatever it is, gets hungry.
Just a very, very quick, funny one to finish off. I like to finish on a laugh. After that serious bit. Many of you have interviewed UFO witnesses, I know, many hundred. Myself. I had a phone call at 3 o'clock in the morning in the middle of the UFO wave. Dear sweet little old lady. Excuse me, are you the gentleman in the paper? Yes, I am, yeah. I'm seeing a UFO. I said, oh, I'm 85, it's the first one I've ever seen in my life. Oh, that's marvellous. The wife's beside me. Who's that? Funny up at the start. I said, shh, it's all right. Hang on, I'll tell you what it's like. I'll just go and have a look. So I'm hanging on. She goes, well, it's, and then it's coming, and I'm thinking, something wrong with the phone. So I'm banging the phone. And I said, excuse me, you're breaking up. I said, and then I'm suddenly thinking, God, electromagnetic fields, you know, this is affecting your phone line. This is good. And they're going, yeah, and she goes, I said, you're breaking up. Can you just speak a bit louder, please? She goes, oh, no, I'm not breaking up. I'm bouncing up and down on the top of my bed with my army's binoculars trying to get a better view of it. So never assume that it's electromagnetic interference. It could very well be slumberland. But that just goes to show some You know, we do get the funny moments as well as the serious ones in these investigations. So
Anyway, guys, thanks
yeah.
very much for bearing with us.
True.
If you've got any questions, time to fire away. If not, come out and buy our book. If not, we'll probably be in a pub across the road and mine's a lager. Questions, anyway? Yes, dear boy. Yeah. Yeah, I tend to think that ectoplasm is a quasi-solid manifestation of the idyllic life force energy. I mean, yeah, I mean, I have no problem with that. It sort of fits in totally, as far as I'm concerned, with the global paradigm that I'm suggesting.
Yeah, I mean, somebody also said to us, how is it, if this is a idyllic energy, how can it physically harm whales? Well, again, you may have seen it, I've certainly seen it, documented and witnessed video footage of poltergeist activity which actually injures human beings on film. Have you ever actually seen that? I mean, I've seen where you've got 2 or 3 independent doctors standing by while this film is being actually taken, and you can see the wheel marks and the scratches and bites actually coming up on the body of the poor person concerned, and this is through poltergeist activity. So poltergeists are a form of idyllic energy. They can harm human beings, they can certainly harm animals and everything else.
I mean, it's one of the things that I'm working on at the moment is the link between, broadly, paranormal activity and socio-cultural phenomena. Now, I was a vegetarian for 15 years, and I don't know how many hundreds of aubergines I must have eaten in my life. And I've sliced probably hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of aubergines in half before frying them, and I've never once found the word of Allah written in seeds inside the aubergine. I think that is because I'm not a Muslim, and I'm not from a Muslim background. I believe that you get the paranormal phenomena, you get the phenomena which your culture, or to a certain extent the country you're living in, has prepared you for. And I can give you one example of that. When I was in Mexico, over a period of 3.5 weeks, I interviewed 49 different lots of people who had encountered the chupacabra, the goat sucker. And 48 of these people, all the witness accounts were exactly the same. Now, as I said before, I'm a Roman Catholic. I'm not a very good Roman Catholic, but I'm a Roman Catholic. But my personal brand of Catholicism and the brand of Catholicism practiced in Central America are 2 totally different things. There is very much of an ethos of blood, guts, and gore and I'm not being the slightest bit racist, but in Central America, whereas in Britain in a church you would find a painting or stained glass window or a statue of the crucifixion, in some of the churches I visited in Mexico, there were statues of people being ritually disemboweled and pulled apart by wild horses, and god-awful things happened to them. But under all the icons of the crucifixion, the ethos was saving the holy blood. You always had somebody underneath the cross with a cup catching the blood, because the blood, the holy blood, is the most sacred sacrament of the Christian church. It is the thing which is given out in the communion wine. It is the most sacred and important sacrament of the Christian church. Now, everywhere that I visited, with one exception, was a Roman Catholic area. And in all of 48 of the 49 witnesses that I interviewed, the MO of the chupacabra killings were all exactly the same. In a smaller animal, like a chicken or a duck, there was one puncture mark in the neck, one in the sternum. The animal was completely drained of blood. Usually the liver was removed. And although there were footprints, sometimes were footprints, sometimes there weren't footprints, there was never any trace of blood on the ground. And that was in an area where the whole religious iconography of the people is about the sanctity of the blood, the importance of the blood. Although they believed in the blood sacrifice, the blood was the sacred medium. Now, totally by chance, I ended up in a village with an unpronounceable name in the middle of the Mexican desert called Tlalopzitan. And it was an Indian village, and it was populated by the descendants of the Aztecs. And I didn't know this at the time. I only found out the importance of the village when I came back to England, and I found out totally by chance. Now, the Aztecs also believed in a blood sacrifice, but they used to grab the heart out of the living victim and then pour the blood on the ground as propitiation to the earth gods. And lo and behold, in the one place I went which wasn't from a Roman Catholic background, the MO of the Chupacabra killings was the same. 2 puncture marks in the neck, liver removed, body drained of blood. But the blood was drained onto the ground. The blood was spattered around in the one place where their cultural history led them to believe that the blood, being equally as sacred as the blood of the Christian, that the blood of the sacrificial victim was to be spattered on the ground. Which is where I suddenly came to the conclusion that all paranormal activity works according to your own social and political background, your own cultural background. And the book which I'm working on at the moment is trying to explain that in more depth. The fact is that everybody gets the paranormal occurrences that their culture has already preconceived them to get. It's just the way things work. And when people start to accept that, and that is a far more greater and more wonderful and more bizarre thing to get your head around than 3/4 of the stuff that you read about sort of mainstream mythology. But that's just my personal thoughts. Questions? Anybody else, guys? Okay, well, thank you very much indeed, guys. Thanks for having us. Come out and buy the book.
Don't forget your scarf.